the shaman retrieves that self that never left the Garden of Eden, that still speaks with God, that does not die. Pretty heady stuff. Everyone else is waiting for eternity, and the shamans are saying, how about tonight? The problem with time as we know it is that it is wedded to causality. Cause and effect. Who I am today is the result of what happened yesterday or 10 years ago.
Ven aquí, mi niño. Siéntate. Quédate en silencio.
El silencio cubre la soledad. El pueblo es lo que importa y el pueblo lo tiene la revolución.
In 1973, Dr. Alberto Villoldo, trained as a psychologist and medical anthropologist, left his psychosomatic research institute at San Francisco State University, California, to travel around the globe and investigate how to create psychosomatic health. He concentrated his study with shaman healers in the Americas, who specialized in treating illness before it manifested in the physical body. They did not work on the physical body itself, but on the luminous energy field surrounding it. These master medicine men and women understood that the luminous energy field is a template of light that determines how our body heals, how we live, and how we might die. When the imprints of disease are erased from it, a person returns to health. Dr. Villoldo lived with these shamans and sages and experienced his own healing. He was chosen by them to carry these ancient healing practices that can be known but not told to the rest of the world, and this is the origin of what is today a contemporary school of wisdom and science, stimulating healing at soul level.
I met Alberto many years ago. I've been on the road teaching 35 years, and I know Alberto's been out there. One of the things I really appreciate about Alberto is his willingness to step outside his own culture, to bring together a kind of understanding to give to the world and to offer it. And he's had the kind of energy that can put together an organization, a group of people, to support that work in the world.
Antonio was my mentor, was my teacher. He was the combination of a father figure and a compassionate, kind, and wise old man. I had spent 20 years training with him.
Alberto es considerado en el mundo chamánico indígena americano como el gran Hatun Runa, el gran puente, quien es capaz de llevar las enseñanzas de la tierra, del espíritu, a la mente occidental.
Shamanism is a perennial philosophy that is found all around the world, encompassing indigenous wisdom teachings and healing practices, as well as rites of passage or initiations. Whether it is found in Asia, Australia, or the Brazilian Amazon, it shares a common body of knowledge. This body of knowledge originated in Africa 85,000 years ago and traveled with the first migrations out of Africa, with the people that settled in the foothills of the Himalayas. It was brought into Europe and into North America by a small group of hunter-gatherers who crossed the Himalayas and walked over the Bering Strait, and it was taken into Australia by the first navigators across the ocean. This body of knowledge acquired cultural flavors along the way, so we may call it Mayan, Hopi, or Incan, but the Himalayan source is one and the same, and it shares a common ancestry with yogic wisdom.
Don Manuel was the last of the great shamans. He was a living example of what it meant to be holy without being saintly. The shaman is not a shaman until she brings back her discipline, her practice. I was raised by a nanny who was part Indian and part African in Cuba. And she was like a second mother to me. And I remember going into her room one day. I was 5 years old.
Ven aquí, mi niño. Siéntate. Quédate en silencio. Yo soy un antiguo esclavo africano que te voy a proteger por el resto de tu vida. No tengas miedo. Yo te protegeré. Y tu nani va a estar muy bien, porque ella es parte de nosotros. Ella es parte de nuestra gente.
My nanny was a practitioner of the Afro-Cuban spiritist traditions. And this was my first introduction at the age of 5 to the world of spirits, to the invisible world, a world that I've spent the last 50 years exploring. And knowing that while we have 5 ordinary senses, and 6 of these, if you wish to count intuition as one of them, that I have been exploring the world through the furthest reaches of these senses. I've been exploring the world of dreams consciously. I've been dreaming my reality into being with my eyes open. I've been learning to see into the invisible world. I've learned to listen to the voice of ancestors that lived 1,000 years ago. I've learned to extend beyond the ordinary. Don Manuel Quispe is 90 years old and the oldest living Inca medicine man. I first read about Don Manuel in a 1962 National Geographic special on Peru, where he was described at the age of 52 as one of the oldest of the Quero shamans, and the only one who still remembered how to count with the quipu, the ring of colored knotted strings on which the accounting of the Inca Empire was kept. By the time I met him in 1989, all that he could use the quipu for was telling stories. He had forgotten the math of the Incas. All that remained in his head were the legends. Don Manuel was born in the community of Quero, the son of a farmer. At the age of 15, he became very ill. His father took him to the healers of his village, and no one was able to help, not even the doctors at the medical post in the city of Cusco. While bringing his emaciated son back to Quero, he stopped at the sanctuary of Huanca, a holy place where the power of nature congregates. The sanctuary of Huanca was so revered by the Inca that the Catholic priest had built a church above it to convert the Indians. A miracle occurred, and Don Manuel began to eat and regain his strength. Huanca is located halfway up the southern face of Mount Pachatusan, whose name means the axis of the world. The mountain spirits instructed Manuel to travel to another Apu, or sacred mountain named Ururu, directly across the valley. Young Manuel spent the next few months living in a cave like a hermit, drinking the water that filtered through the walls of the cavern, going for long walks alone in the mountain. Here is where he first began speaking to the Apu. The mountain itself became his teacher. He had been on the brink of death, had experienced the continuity of life on the other side, and come back. On his return to Quito, he completed his apprenticeship, formally undergoing the rites of passage under one of the legendary shamans of Quito. I remember one of the first things that I had to learn about myself and accept was the fact that I had never let anyone know who I really was, to the point that even I had forgotten who I was. I was always hiding, veiling, and not being willing to disclose. I always had a face ready for anyone's examination. I was completely inauthentic. I was the most inauthentic person that I knew, and everybody thought that I was so sincere. I was a well-sculpted lie. And when I realized this in my early 20s, it was terrible, it was devastating. I thought I needed a persona in order to survive. And this persona became like an entity that had possessed me, to the point that I had become lost. I had lost my soul. And that was the first thing I saw as my inner vision was awakening. And this is what truly launched me into a journey into the medicine way. After seeing this, I became a wounded person seeking to become whole. And then my journey opened up before me. There are two kinds of people in this world. There are those who are dreamers and those who are being dreamed. There comes a time in every man's life when he must encounter his past. For those who are dreamed, who have no more than a passing acquaintance with power, this moment is usually played out from their deathbeds as they try to bargain with fate for a few more moments of lifetime. But for the dreamer, the person of power, this moment takes place alone, before fire, when he calls upon the specters of his personal past to stand before him like witnesses before the court. This is the work of the South, where the medicine wheel begins. I am not speaking of remembering the past. Anyone can remember the past, and in remembering, we frame it to serve and justify our present. Remembering is a conscious act, and therefore subject to embellishment. Remembering is easy. The person of power sits alone before the fire. He confronts his past. He hears the testimony of these specters, and he dismisses them one by one. He acquits himself of his past. Do you comprehend this? The man of power has no past, no history that can claim him. He has cast aside his shadow and learned to walk in the snow without leaving tracks.
The shamans that he worked with in Peru were known as the Laika. Laika is an ancient word meaning wisdom keeper. But after the arrival of the conquistadors and the missionaries who believed that these men and women were practicing witchcraft and sorcery, the word Laika became associated with witches. The word Toltec in Central America has the same meaning. These wisdom teachings are founded on the practice of infinity, the experience of infinity, timelessness. Infinity is before time and after time. But the teachings are eminently practical processes, so for the shaman, it was not important to describe infinity, but to actually step into infinity. The shaman achieves this by expanding their 8th chakra. In the West, we are all familiar with 7 chakras in the body, but the shamans identified an 8th chakra, a luminous orb that is outside the physical body, hovering above the head. This is an element of the self which has always resided outside of time, which in the West is called the soul, and manifests as the body in the river of time. The shamans recognize the energies of the soul, and that when you die, the 7 chakras in the body upload their information into this radiant sun of the 8th chakra, which then selects the families that you will be born into next. The information from the 8th chakra is downloaded into the 7 chakras of the child when it's in the uterus. And as soon as that child is born and takes its first breath, all these chakras are activated. In this way, we come under the grip of what we call karma. But the 8th chakra resides out of time, in infinity. The shamans could identify with their infinite, undying selves, and when they did so, they were able to journey back to the very beginning of time and forward into the future to retrieve a more desirable destiny for themselves or for their village. All of the shamanic healing practices were born from the shaman's skills of stepping into infinity.
I met a lot of fakes, a lot of frauds, and a lot of people that claimed to know a lot, that were interested in money or were interested in sexual favors from the young women or the young men. And I met a few masters that were not looking for students, that were not looking for fame, and they were great masters. They waited for the student to find them. And I was very lucky to work with a number of these great teachers. The first time I met my mentor, we were at the University of Cusco. I was looking for a translator, for someone who would help me to communicate in the Quechua language as I searched for a reputable shaman. And I wanted to find a true master teacher, not simply an herbalist or a bone setter or someone who knew how to concoct healing remedies, but someone who was a wisdom keeper. And to do that, I needed a translator. The men and women I was interested in were living in the high mountains in the Andes, above the snow line, above 18,000 feet, and spoke no Spanish. As I met the man who would become my mentor, he listened to my idea. He was a professor at the university, a professor of philosophy, and an Indian, fluent in the Quechua language and fluent in the ways of the West. And he agreed to help me after he would look at me very eerily and in a way as if he was almost looking through me. And the first month that we traveled together, he wanted to know everything about me. I told him the story of my entire life, but he was very reserved about his own story. Later, I learned that he was born in the high mountains, in villages belonging to the Quero people, in a village named Yahuarcancha, the place of the jaguars, high up in the mountains. His parents had died, and he had relocated to Cusco, where he worked cleaning the churches of Cusco. He would sweep the churches in exchange for a place to sleep and the food that he would eat. But every summer, he would go back up to the mountains to continue his training in the medicine way. Eventually, he agreed to become my translator, and I traveled throughout the highlands with him. After dinner, we went for what I thought would be a short stroll. but Antonio kept taking me further into the forest. We arrived at a clearing where he asked me to sit on a boulder and connect with a tall pine a dozen yards away. I closed my eyes and imagined reaching out to the tree. "Not with your head, niño, with your belly," he said. "Extend a tendril of light from your cosco, your second chakra, to the tree." When I did this, I could feel a visceral connection with the pine, as if we were touching. I could sense the texture of the bark and even go into the tree itself. When Antonio asked me to open my eyes, I could see the light filament extending from my belly. Now uncouple from the tree and connect to your earliest memory. Try to remember back to when you were a toddler, before you could walk, and link the filament to this boy, he said. I must have spent the next hour trying to do it. I could tell Antonio was growing impatient. "You are thinking," he said. "Stop thinking, just do." And then I got it. I could feel the skin of this boy the way I had felt the skin of the tree. I could taste what he tasted and sense how big the world felt. All of my senses were active and nearly on overload. It was no longer the me that I knew who was touching and feeling, but another, older, equally as familiar, younger me. Then Antonio asked me to follow that luminous fiber, to track along the cord itself, allowing the images and feelings to flood into me. I imagined that I was walking along this cord as I walk on a trail, and spied images of my childhood and adolescence I had not thought about in decades. The Halloween costume my parents made me wear when I was 5, the crush I had on my 3rd grade teacher the time our dog died. The strangest thing, I was not only seeing the images, but the emotions were deluging me. I saw every painful and joyous moment of my life. Then Antonio tapped me on the shoulder. "Next time," he said, "we're going to connect with who you are becoming 10,000 years from now."
That work that Alberto offers is based in his work around the world, his research, his studying with people around the world, and his understanding that goes deeply into, I think, who we are as modern people, how our brain works, how our body works. He's been a seeker of knowledge and understanding, and has been someone who can blend that into a kind of wholeness that is useful for us in the modern world. And so many people now can do healing work and use these shamanic ways.
The shaman saw that the energy field, which is the luminous body, is an information field. Within this luminous blueprint are signatures or imprints of trauma. Stories of betrayal, abandonment, and loss are stored in a holographic fashion in the tides and streams of life force swirling about in the luminous field, creating dark, heavy spots among the whirls of lighter energy. Some of these are very ancient imprints of trauma that you may have suffered 2,000 years ago in a previous lifetime. Some are cultural, the traumas of your people as they went into exile, and some of them are genetic. If you have a family history of heart disease or breast cancer, this information is encoded in your energy field until you are healed of this legacy. These imprints contain the same information that is contained in your DNA code that might predispose you to die from the same illnesses that your parents died from. What the shamans discovered was that they could clear these signatures from the luminous energy field. They could erase the blueprint. They could re-inform it and update the quality of the information in your DNA by changing the information in the luminous energy field. This is the core of the illumination process.
My journey into healing began with my own healing. I was born in Cuba, and we fled Cuba during the revolution. I was 10 years old, and I remember my father sitting me down and giving me a gun at the age of 10 and asking me to sit by the door. And he said to me, Alberto, when I'm gone during the day, you're the man of the house, and you have to protect your mother, your sister, and your grandmother. And if anybody tries to break through the door, you shoot right through the door. And he showed me how to do that. I said, cool, this is great. You know, 10-year-old boy with a real gun. And I would take the bullets out and load them into the clip and put them into the pistol and cock it and work the safety. And for 3 months, I sat by this door and I sat with death. And the first day I remembered how excited I was. The second day I thought, you know, I could kill someone. And the third day I thought, someone could kill me. But even more terrifying was the idea that I could kill someone, that I might have to kill someone to take a life. Finally, at the end of the third month, militiamen come to the house, bearded militiamen. They knock at the door, and I could hear them talking among themselves, and I don't answer. And they start kicking the door in, and I'm holding the gun up to the door and saying, do I shoot through the door or do I shoot through the door? And then I did what any 10-year-old boy would do, which was to put the gun down and go to the window and look out the window. And one of the militiamen saw this terrified little boy. And he turned around and said to the others, come, there's no one here, let's go. And he saved my life. But at the same time, this was when I suffered my greatest loss of soul, because after that time, I became a very mature little man. I stopped playing, I stopped knowing how to have fun, I stopped smiling. I wasn't able to sleep properly. I had terrible nightmares that at any time these bearded men could come into my home and take away the people that I loved the most. We left Cuba and I ended up in California in the 1970s when everyone, including me, was a hippie. And all my friends started growing beards and letting their hair grow long. And I noticed that as soon as my good friends grew a beard, that I would start withdrawing from the friendship. I would be terrified. And I recognized that this was because of these militiamen. And it wasn't until I worked with my mentor and did a soul retrieval that I recovered this 10-year-old little boy. It wasn't until my late 20s that I was able to play again, that I was able to smile, that I was able to trust people.
Alberto ha pasado todas estas enseñanzas de los queros, como los munaikís, como todas las transmisiones energéticas, y ha formado una escuela, nada menos, para poder enseñar todo esto. Y eso tiene un gran valor.
Don Manuel explained to me the initiations of the Andean shaman. There are 7 levels or major rites of initiation. The healer needed only the first 2 levels. The master shaman needed the first 4. Very few people completed all 7 levels. Don Manuel, Doña Laura, Don Antonio were the only remaining shamans who had achieved all 7 levels of initiation. After this rite of passage, the healer never works alone. She is supported by a community of luminous spirits who assist her in her healing. These luminous ones transcend culture and time. The rite connects you to this lineage of luminous healers who recognize you and respond to your call.
The shamans found that they could contain another person within their luminous energy field in a place where they could access alternate destinies, where they could heal a trauma that occurred when they were young, where they could journey into the past to heal events that occurred many years ago, or into the future to nudge destiny. They could erase imprints in the luminous energy field caused by trauma. The trauma is not what happens to us. Trauma is the way that we remember what happened to us. How we were wounded, abandoned, neglected, violated emotionally, verbally, or physically. Of course, terrible things happen. But when we weave terrible stories around them, they continue to haunt us and to live within us. So during the illumination process, we are able to heal the imprints of very ancient trauma, as well as imprints which predispose us to physical and emotional disease. Imprints work like an icon on a computer that sits unobtrusively until you double-click on it, and then the program begins to run. It takes over your central nervous system and can manifest as a heart condition or as a cancer. Once the imprint has been activated, once you are stuck in the wrong marriage, once you are in the grip of disease, it is more difficult to clear the imprint, but it can still be erased. And it's only when the imprint is cleared that healing happens.
Working with him and his school and his people, I feel like I've developed another side of myself that was dormant in a sense. And it isn't my finest skill perhaps, but I am better and better and better at at that perception and that way of walking that brings in spirit and brings in the mystery of life and the intuition, the deeper, richer part of ourselves that can guide us in a wonderful way. So it's been a benefit to me personally. It's been a benefit through me to my students and my clients, so that what I offer, some of it is based in what Alberto has shared through what he has put together in the world.
There's one experience that I had to highlight. It would be being in the jungle during ceremony and having my false sense of self ripped out of me by a being with the shape of a condor that kept sinking its beak, very big. A condor sinking its beak into my eyes and pulling my face off and ripping my flesh out. And later I would realize that this was the death of my false self, of my ego, of my attachment to my name and my history and my identity that was so deeply rooted that my face had to come off, my flesh had to be ripped away. And this is a very classical form of shamanic initiation, but terrifying and blissful at the end of the process to find out that I was there, that what was left was me. It took years for me to develop the ability to see the spaces in between things. In order to do so, I first had to be willing to see myself in my totality. My gifts, my vulnerabilities, my weaknesses, my flaws, my failures, my victories, my dark side. I had to be willing to see every facet and aspect of myself. And once I was able to do that and to see it without judgment, then my vision opened up. Then I was able to witness reality multidimensionally, with color, with texture, with vibrancy, I was able to see energy. But not only to see the colors of energy, but to understand and to read the stories that the energy contained. I would be able to look at someone and tell what had happened to them when they were 6, or the argument that they had with their beloved the evening before, or their excitement about their child that was about to be born through them that they did not even know was about to happen yet.
The old shamanic practices, and even still in the Himalayas, the great shamanic teachings are about death, sex and death, surrender to another, surrender to the end of this life. The shamans believe in reincarnation, but they don't believe in reincarnation the way that we have been led to believe. They understand that you have a limited number of lifetimes. You are an embodiment of this huge wave of possibility that is incarnated into a body and that has the opportunity of becoming conscious and whole. So they say in the jungle, you have 9 lives like a cat. You have 9 lives to acquire immortality. Otherwise, your energy gets mulched again into the cosmos. In the West, we have forgotten how to die consciously. But the death rites are found in the Tibetan, Bon traditions and in many shamanic practices around the world. And they are designed to assist a loved one to journey consciously back home to the world of spirit. There are 3 steps to the death rites. The first is recapitulation, where a person reviews their entire history. It's better to do this here, while you're still alive, than to do it on the other side, when it's more difficult to say the I love yous and I forgive yous that need to be said. The second step is the giving permission to die. It is essential that you give your loved one permission to go, to let them know that we will be all right, that they no longer need to suffer. The third is the technical part of disengaging the luminous energy field. This is done by spinning the chakras in a counterclockwise direction in a giant spiral, beginning with the heart chakra, going down to the 3rd chakra, the solar plexus, and then the throat chakra, then the 2nd chakra at the belly, then the 3rd eye in the middle of the forehead, and then the 1st chakra at the base of the spine, and finally the crown or 7th chakra at the top of the head. This is the unwinding of the great spiral. All the chakras constellate around the heart. The heart is the sun. You have 3 chakras below, 3 chakras above. When you disengage the great spiral of the chakras, you free the luminous body that can then be nudged out with a gentle push from the feet and drawn out through the top of the head, launched on its journey back home. The chakras are the rivet points. They are the connection points between the luminous body and the physical body. When we unscrew the chakras, we free the luminous body from the physical into infinity.
when we were greeted at the village, I was surprised to hear the local resident who received us address my translator by the name of the high shaman that we had been looking for. And he said, "Welcome, Don Hikaram, welcome." And I knew that the word Hikaram was a derivative of Ikaro, which is an individual who's able to summon the spirits through his song. The Ikaros are the songs. There was a woman lying there, stretched out on the pallet. It was impossible to judge her age. She was so emaciated. Her skin was yellow with jaundice and stretched taut over the bones of her face. She made no movement, no telltale sign of awareness, nothing to show us that she knew we were there. Antonio turned and looked at me. "A missionary," he whispered. "She was brought here 2 days ago by the Indians from below." He gestured toward the hillside and beyond it toward the jungle. "Her liver has failed," I said. "I think she's in a coma." I asked what we could do. "Nothing. She will die tonight. We can only help to free her spirit." 20 or 30 candles had transformed the mud and straw hut into a sort of chapel. The first thing that struck me was how cold the room had become. And then I touched my mentor, and his skin was warm. My fingers were like ice, and I realized that it was an inner cold, that it was death itself, the death that lived inside me, that had been awakened, and I began to tremble. Don Antonio moved his hands to a spot an inch or so above her heart. With first and second fingers extended, he began to make a counterclockwise circular motion, and he drew his hand away, still spiraling, up into the smoky air. Heart chakra. He did this 3 times. And I saw, as he was working with the missionary, how much love and caring he was bringing to attending to her. Well, I was terrified of death. I was afraid of touching her because death might be contagious. I might become afflicted by it. "Look," he said. I took my eyes from his face and looked down at the body, at the ever so slight rise and fall of her chest. Then Antonio hit me in the head. It was lightning fast. His elbow came up and struck my forehead with a hard, sharp blow. My head swam for an instant. My hand flew to the spot reflexively. "Look," he said. Something glimmered along the surface of her body, something milky and translucent, an inch or so above the body's contour. And I began to witness the event that was taking place. It was as if my vision had been opened, the veils had been parted, and I began to see beings in the room and lights that were not given off by the candles, spheres of light in the room that had come to attend the passing of this missionary, and in the process had come to heal me of my own death. Because death, I was shown that night, does not exist. Look now. Soften your focus. And there it was, out of focus, but clearly there, an ever so subtle glow, now 3 to 4 inches from her skin, as if a luminous mold of her body were emerging from the flesh. A sight that we have forgotten, that has been clouded by time and reason. What is it? It is she, he said. It is her essence, her luminous body. She would call it the soul. She wants to let go. Antonio worked for another hour. He repeated the procedure that I had witnessed before, repeated it with the same patient intensity, never hesitating, dedicated to the work at hand. Suddenly her chest heaved, and she gasped as the air rushed through her mouth and into her lungs. It stayed there. Exhale. And there came a long wheeze, like a labored sigh, as her last breath seeped from her chest and through her open mouth. I sensed also that my own death was lifted from me and taken by these beings and returned to the Mother Earth where it could be mulched back into life. The spirit of the missionary was taken to the heavens, was received, and suddenly that room, that dank, cold room became a luminous cathedral, and I was sitting in the company of angels.
The next healing intervention is the extraction process. In the West, people believe that all their energies belong to them. The shaman understands that there are energies that don't belong to you. There are 2 kinds of energy that they work with. Intrusive energies that are directed at you in the form of psychic attack, which are called envy, jealousy, negativity, and so on. And intrusive entities that are actually beings that have become attached to you. To extract these energies or entities, the shaman utilizes a very fine crystal. During the extraction process, they coax an intrusive energy or entity into this crystal. The crystal is like a vacuum cleaner. It will draw these energies into itself and clear them from the person's field. It is one of the shaman's most powerful tools.
It's time to go now. Come on. I have to leave. It's time to go.
We have been walking for days. I told Antonio that I did not mind paying for us to take a bus or even a taxi, but he would have nothing to do with it, would not even let me hire horses. My people have always walked, he said, and he loves to point out how he can outwalk me even though he is nearly 70. Took my shoes off when we arrived at Siustani and soaked my feet in the icy lake. This is an eerie place, a cemetery extending over dozens of miles, like the Valley of the Kings in Egypt. Only shamans, kings, and queens are buried here in gigantic stone towers at the edge of Lake Titicaca. The finest stonemasons came from this land. How did this technology develop here at the lake on top of the world? Antonio explained that the burial towers, or chulpas, not only commemorate the dead shamans, but also are their temporary homes when they return to visit our world. We had come here to spend the night, to do ceremony, to honor these ancient shamans. Yet I've never enjoyed cemeteries. They've stepped outside of time, he said. He explained that if my faith in reality was based on the belief that time runs in one direction only, then I will be shattered by an experience of my future. It takes great skill to taste the future and not allow your knowledge to spoil your actions or the present.
They say that the shaman lives in perfect Aini. This is the basis of all Andean shamanism. The meaning of Aini is the principle of reciprocity. The universe reciprocates the shaman's every action, mirrors his intent back to him as he is a mirror to others. And that is why the shaman lives in synchronicity with nature. The shaman's world mirrors the shaman's will and his intent and actions.
These forms of Aini are performed out of fear or convention, not out of love. Eventually we make Aini because we must, because we feel it here. He touched his breast. They say that only then is Aini perfect. But I believe that Aini is always perfect, that our world is always a true reflection of our intent and our lives and our actions. That is my opinion, but I think that it is a good one. The condition of our world depends upon the condition of our consciousness.
The Munai key is be as thou art, love in my heart. We are love. This is the Munai place. All of the 9 rites have been translated into a pure energetic form. The 9th rite is the creator rite called the Taitanchi rite. And this came down just a few years ago on the top of Salcantay. It was given to Alberto and a group of people who were ready to receive it. We were thinking it would take a lot more time before we would be able to receive this rite, but now it's available to all of us.
Antonio had commented that I am a weeder and that he was a gardener. He charged me with always working on healing my faults, digging my hurt up like weeds. Nothing beautiful grew in the garden of my soul, he said. I did not know how to water the seeds of my spirit, of who I could become. So he sent me to this cave on a vision quest to fast for 5 days. The last 2 days I've spent weeding the cave. Turns out I do that pretty well. The ground is clear now, rich, dark soil that compacts easily. Threw away the Hershey bar at the bottom of my pack this morning, unwrapped it, pocketed the foil, and tossed the chocolate into the jungle. All I had been thinking of for the last 2 days was that piece of chocolate. Antonio is right. I am a weeder, and my life is a jungle, tangled and overgrown. Stuff just grows in it. Sometimes exotic plants, most of the time vines and creepers that I get tangled in. It takes all my energy to keep the ground beneath me cleared. How do I plant the fruit trees and flowers I want to grow old with?
El regalo de Alberto no solamente son enseñanzas, técnicas de sanación, sino que lo más importante es un linaje. Es un linaje que nos guía en nuestras vidas a seguir expandiéndonos, creciendo, iluminándonos.
Healing is the business of shamans. Healing has to do with a profound experience of infinity. So the shamans differentiate between curing and healing. Curing is the business of medicine. It is the elimination of symptoms. Some people get healed but have not been cured, and they may still die, but consciously, and often with very little pain. Others who have been cured but have not been healed may have had the symptoms eliminated, but are still caught in the grip of the imprint. So a cure will seldom result in a healing, But a healing, when you clear an imprint from the luminous energy field, will almost always result in a cure.
Don Manuel was the last of the great shamans. He was a living example of what it meant to be holy without being saintly. He enjoyed a glass of beer. He talked about the deliciousness of life, beautiful men, beautiful women, beautiful places. He was a man who inhabited his body with the fullness of his soul. Nothing got between him and the deliciousness and the savoring of every moment. He knew my mentor, Antonio, and in the early days objected to my training, believing that these teachings were only for the Indians. Slowly with time, he came to recognize that he came here to be a shaman to the world, not only to his village, to his tribe, to his region, but to the entire earth. And I was the very first Westerner that he ever gave his initiation to. And after I received his karpai, his initiation, he said to me, "Take it into the world. Share it with others. Don't keep it for yourself only. You, like me, are a bridge. We're a bridge between the ancient and the future. And if our bridge collapses, our children's children will have to rebuild this world from scratch." So I took him up on his offer. I received his initiation. I shared it with others. And I became a bridge between the ancient medicine and the new science that is emerging today in the West. Antonio was my mentor, was my teacher. He was the combination of a father figure and a compassionate, kind, and wise old man. And I had spent 20 years training with him. Only he and I were the only people who knew how little I truly knew. And one day he invites me to go with him back to the place of birth, to the place of origin, to Lake Titicaca, because he was going on his final journey. And I was not ready to let him go. In fact, I became angry. I said, "You can't do this. There are people that need you. I need you." And he said, "No, my time has come. It's time for others to take up where I had left off." And I accompanied him back to the island of the sun in Lake Titicaca. But before we went there, we went to the cemetery on top of the world called Siustani. And we did ceremony there one night. That evening, I became comfortable with those that had come before us. He explained to me that these were men and women who had defied death. They had defied death. They had stepped beyond death. They could never be claimed by death because they had been claimed by life. That was what he had come to do. That in returning his gifts, the gifts that had served him and so many people during his life, he was coming to receive the greatest gift of all, which was the gift of his gift of infinity, of timelessness. And in a nighttime ceremony, he took each one of his sacred objects, of the objects in his altar, and blew its energy and its power to one of the four directions. And in doing so, he ceased to be Don Hikaram, and he became Don Antonio. He became a man who belonged to himself again, no longer to his medicine, no longer to the wisdom, no longer to the lineage only. He again belonged to himself. And he regained his innocence. He became childlike again. And I realized that this is what I'm doing right now in my life as well. That through my books is a way that I have been able to give my medicine to others. That I have come to the end of a stage where I belong to the medicine, where I had to heal, to teach, to bring this body of wisdom into our world. And now my work is complete. That part of my work is complete. I can belong to myself once again. The work has been, I've released it to the four winds, and now I'm coming back to my innocence once again, into not knowing. Everyone else is waiting for eternity, and the shamans are saying, how about tonight? The problem with time as we know it is that it is wedded to causality. Cause and effect. Tonight is a good night to step outside of time. Infinity is patient. I can see for you, Miguel,
Okay, let's
that
see.
you're going to be making a movie
Oh, yeah.
about this. Yeah,
About
very
this book?
successful. One,
Yes.
yeah.